What if the greatest threat to our future isn't malice, but something far more common, far more comfortable? What if the collapse of civilization isn't driven by hatred, but by people who simply stop thinking? People who trade their capacity for reason for the convenience of belonging. Not because they're bad, not because they're cruel, but because they're tired, overwhelmed, and seduced by certainty. That's the terrifying force Dietrich Bonhoeffer saw rising, not evil, but stupidity. Not ignorance in the traditional sense, but a deeper kind of blindness, a moral numbness, a surrender of thought disguised as loyalty, faith, or virtue. This kind of stupidity is not a lack of intelligence, it's a spiritual collapse. It can hijack the minds of doctors, professors, mothers, fathers, good loving people. It turns scientists into mouthpieces for propaganda. It makes teachers endorse cruelty in the name of order. It turns parents into conspiracists who harm the very children they love. And the most disturbing part, these people believe they are doing good. They don't feel wrong. They feel righteous. The Milgram obedience experiments revealed just how easily ordinary people could be led to commit harmful acts, not because they wanted to, but because they were told to. Under pressure, they surrendered their moral judgment to authority. They shocked others quite literally simply because someone in a lab coat said it was okay. These weren't monsters. They were people like us. Bonhoeffer didn't theorize this from a distance. He watched it unfold in Nazi Germany, where cultured, educated citizens welcomed the destruction of their own moral compass. He saw what happens when fear replaces conscience and slogans replace thought. And he asked a brutal question, one that still echoes today. Have you ever believed something just because everyone around you did? Because if you have, then you already know the enemy isn't just out there. It's in here, waiting for permission to take over. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Thanks so much for your support. Imagine watching a society of doctors, priests, and professors willingly erase their own minds because it's easier than resisting. Imagine people you once trusted, people you believed would protect truth and conscience, abandoning both not out of hatred, but out of fear fatigue and the desperate need to belong. That's what Dietrich Bonhoeffer witnessed. Not the rise of monsters, but the slow, silent death of thought. He didn't write from the safety of hindsight or the comfort of theory. He wrote from inside the machine, inside a nation, collapsing under the weight of its own intellectual surrender. Bonhoeffer wasn't some aloof academic. He was a pastor, a theologian, a man of deep moral conviction and rigorous intellect. He grew up in an enlightened, highly educated family. He believed in reason. He trusted in the power of knowledge and conscience. But as he watched his fellow citizens, teachers, clergy, scientists embrace the Nazi regime with terrifying enthusiasm, something inside him broke. He saw what most people still refuse to face. Education does not immunize you against moral collapse. Intelligence doesn't guarantee wisdom. Titles don't protect truth. Even the most enlightened minds can be swallowed by stupidity if they surrender the will to think. The people who cheered for Hitler weren't ignorant. They were cultured, articulate, and complicit. They didn't resist the propaganda. They welcomed it because it gave them certainty, identity, and a sense of righteousness. And that's what makes stupidity so much more dangerous than evil. Evil knows it's wrong. Evil hides. Evil recoils when exposed. But stupidity walks boldly into the light. It smiles. It shouts. It believes. And because it sees itself as good, it cannot be corrected. It cannot be reasoned with. It cannot even see that anything is wrong. From the concrete walls of a Nazi prison, Bonhoeffer wrote the words that still strike like a hammer. Against stupidity, we are defenseless. Think about that. Not against weapons, not against violence, but against stupidity, because it silences questioning before it begins. It replaces thought with slogans, reflection with obedience. And most terrifying of all, it doesn't look like stupidity. It looks like morality. It looks like patriotism. It looks like virtue. So ask yourself, how many times have you stayed silent because speaking the truth felt dangerous? How often have you agreed with something you didn't believe just to avoid conflict? How many times have you swallowed your doubts because everyone around you seemed so sure? That's how it starts. That's how thought dies. Not in dramatic acts of betrayal, but in quiet moments of resignation. But here's the deeper truth. If surrender is a choice, then so is resistance. You are not powerless. Your mind is still yours. And as long as you are willing to question, to think, to stand alone when necessary, you are already pushing back. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be awake. Because in a world sleepwalking toward destruction, one awakened soul can still make a difference. Not all ignorance is accidental. Some of it is manufactured, incentivized, and rewarded. That's the hardest truth to swallow, because it means the erosion of thought isn't just a personal failure, it's a systemic design. We don't just slip into stupidity by mistake. We are seduced into it, pressured into it, trained for it. And somewhere along the way, we stop noticing. We stop resisting. We start calling it normal. Bonhoeffer wasn't pointing his finger at people with low IQs. He wasn't talking about intellectual capacity. He was diagnosing something far more disturbing, functional stupidity. A kind of deliberate unconscious refusal to think critically. A refusal that isn't random, but reinforced. He wrote, "One feels they are not dealing with a person, but with slogans and catchwords that have taken possession of him." And you've seen it. You've felt it. The moment you speak to someone and realize you're not speaking to them, you're speaking to a script. You're speaking to a system that taught them what to say, what to believe, what to fear. This kind of stupidity doesn't live in the shadows. It thrives in broad daylight. It lives in institutions, in algorithms, in economic systems that reward speed over depth, outrage over understanding. Emotional reactivity has become currency. Complexity is punished. Nuance is drowned out by the deafening simplicity of black and white thinking. And so, we adapt. We learn that in this world, it's safer to echo than to question, easier to follow than to stand still, more profitable to feel than to reflect. And here's where it gets dangerous. This adaptation isn't just individual, it becomes collective. One person choosing not to think might be harmless, but an entire culture that rewards that choice, that's a catastrophe. It creates rational ignorance, a society where thinking feels like a burden and surrender becomes the path of least resistance, where silence feels safer than doubt, where we don't just tolerate intellectual laziness, we depend on it to keep the machine running. Because thinking is disruptive. It slows things down. It complicates narratives. It demands responsibility. And when you're caught in a system that profits from simplicity, complexity becomes a threat. You start to see why people give in. Not because they're evil. Not because they're stupid in the way we usually mean. But because they are tired. Because they are scared. Because they are rewarded for not asking the wrong questions. But that also means this stupidity is not inevitable. It is a choice, sometimes conscious, often unconscious, but a choice nonetheless. And what can be chosen can also be unchosen. You are still capable of noticing when the slogans take over. You are still capable of catching yourself when outrage feels easier than reflection. You are still capable of reclaiming the space inside your mind, of remembering that your thoughts are yours. Your brain was built to protect you from tigers, not from lies that feel good. That's the real danger. We weren't designed for this digital jungle of misinformation, emotional manipulation, and psychological pressure. We were built for survival, for quick decisions, for trust in the tribe. So when the world overwhelms us, when fear is high, when certainty is scarce, when life feels like too much, we don't seek truth. We seek comfort. We seek what confirms, not what challenges. And that's exactly where surrender begins. Leon Festinger called it cognitive dissonance, the mental pain we feel when new information threatens what we already believe. And your brain will do almost anything to avoid that pain. It will reject facts. It will rewrite memory. It will cling to comforting lies just to keep the illusion of certainty alive. The more stressed you are, the more desperate you become for psychological safety. And the systems around you, political, economic, digital, know exactly how to exploit that desperation. Bonhoeffer understood this. He knew stupidity wasn't just a flaw in reasoning. It was a strategy for survival in an unbearable world. He saw how people abandoned thought, not out of malice, but because thinking became dangerous. Because believing the lie felt safer than resisting the group. Because going along with the crowd promised protection. That's what Solomon Asch's famous experiments revealed. We will betray our own eyes, deny what we clearly see, just to avoid standing alone. Just to stay inside the warm, suffocating blanket of groupthink. And now, in the age of social media, that groupthink has gone viral. The tribe is no longer 10 people in a village. It's millions of strangers screaming in unison. And the algorithms, they don't care about truth. They care about engagement, about emotion, about feeding you what feels good even if it's false, especially if it's false. Because lies travel faster when they soothe, when they flatter, when they give you someone to blame and nothing to question. You become surrounded not by ideas, but by echoes. Echoes that sound like you, think like you, numb you. And here's the terrifying part. Once a lie is repeated enough, it feels like truth. Not because it's proven, but because it's familiar. Because the emotional reward of certainty is stronger than the discomfort of doubt. And once that happens, you're no longer thinking. You're reacting. You're obeying. You're surrendering. But you are not powerless in this. You still have the ability to feel the dissonance, to sit in it, to let discomfort be a signal not of danger, but of growth. You can still ask, why do I believe what I believe? Who benefits from my belief? What truths have I silenced just to feel safe? Because safety bought at the price of thought isn't safety, it's bondage. This is not a call to cynicism. This is a call to awakening, to reclaim the mind that is yours, to notice when you're choosing comfort over clarity, and to remember that the hardest truths are often the most necessary ones. The lies that feel good will never set you free, but the truth, no matter how painful, always can. If you've made it this far, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything. Let's continue. In a world that profits from your blindness, learning to see is rebellion. Not just a personal act, but a revolutionary one. Because the moment you start to think for yourself, you become dangerous to systems that rely on your submission. You threaten the machine that feeds on your outrage, your distraction, your need to belong. You stop being a product of your environment and start becoming the architect of your mind. And that more than anything, terrifies those who depend on your silence. History repeats this lesson with ruthless clarity. During the Salem witch trials, it wasn't monsters who screamed for executions, it was neighbors. It was mothers. It was people who genuinely believed they were doing good. During McCarthyism, teachers, artists, and scientists were blacklisted, not because they were evil, but because fear made lies feel safer than truth. And in the chaos of COVID, we watched brilliant minds, doctors, scholars, parents, parrot misinformation, not because they lacked intelligence, but because the pressure to conform overwhelmed their capacity to think. This is what Bonhoeffer saw over and over again, not malice, but surrender. Not stupidity by nature, but stupidity by design. That's why Bonhoeffer didn't call for comfort, he called for costly grace. A kind of truth that requires something from you. The grace of clarity that demands sacrifice, discipline, and courage. Because thinking hurts, questioning hurts. Seeing what others refuse to see can be lonely, but it's the only way out. Resistance isn't dramatic. It's not always a protest or a grand speech. It's daily. It's subtle. It's choosing friction over ease. It's setting aside an hour a week to read something you disagree with, just to stretch the edges of your mind. It's asking yourself, what would actually change my mind? And sitting with the discomfort when you don't have a good answer. It's slowing down before you repost that article, that meme, that outrage-fueled post, and asking, is this true or just satisfying? It's saying, I don't know, in a world addicted to instant certainty, and meaning it. But even if we do this individually, it won't be enough unless the system changes with us. Because no amount of personal growth can fully counteract a culture engineered for ignorance. We need transparent algorithms that prioritize truth over clicks. We need public education that teaches not just facts, but how to think. We need media platforms that reward nuance instead of extremism. We need economic reforms that reduce chronic stress, because a mind in survival mode doesn't have the luxury of deep thought. Bonhoeffer understood that thinking clearly is not just a mental activity, it's a moral responsibility, especially when the cost of ignorance is collective destruction. So no, this isn't just about being smart. It's about being awake. It's about resisting the slogans, the emotional bait, the echo chambers, and reclaiming your ability to see. Because in a world built to keep you blind, choosing to see is how you begin to be free. And this is where the battle becomes most personal, because now, the enemy isn't just out there. It's in here, in your hands, in your pocket, in the subtle rewiring of your brain every time you scroll, click react. You're not just up against bad ideas. You're up against your own brain, against billions of dollars, against machines trained to outthink you, outfeel you, outmaneuver your every hesitation. This isn't fear-mongering. This is the reality Bonhoeffer never lived to see, but warned us about all the same. Bonhoeffer watched a nation surrender to propaganda broadcast by radios and newspapers. But what would he have said about a world where the manipulation isn't just broadcast, but tailored, calculated, and injected into your psyche with every algorithmic swipe, where you're not just a consumer of information, but a product of it? He warned that the true danger wasn't in evil men doing evil things. It was in ordinary people surrendering the burden of thought. And today, that burden has never been heavier. The truth is, our brains weren't built for this. We evolved to survive the jungle, not to navigate the jungle of digital deception. We are wired for speed, comfort, and certainty. We crave the familiar. We default to confirmation. That was once a survival advantage. Now it's a vulnerability exploited by technology that feeds you what feels good, not what's true. And the scariest part, it works. It works on all of us. Not just the uneducated, not just the indifferent, but on teachers, scientists, parents, on people who should know better, who do know better, and yet buckle under the weight of fear, confusion, and cognitive fatigue. We saw this unfold during COVID-19, not in shadows, but in plain sight. Intelligent, educated people falling for lies, spreading misinformation, not because they lacked knowledge, but because knowledge alone isn't enough. Not when your mind is under siege. Not when your instinct for psychological relief is stronger than your commitment to the truth. This is what Bonhoeffer meant when he said, "When you surrender your mind, you surrender your humanity." Because your mind isn't just a tool for thinking. It's the seat of your conscience, your compass, your last defense against being turned into something less than human. Bonhoeffer died for that belief. Hanged just weeks before the collapse of the regime, he fought so quietly, so bravely, from inside prison walls. His final act wasn't just martyrdom, it was defiance. A refusal to let the machinery of unthinking grind down the sacred dignity of a thinking soul. And if you want to honor that resistance, not in theory, but in practice, then you must start with the battlefield inside your own head. Because this isn't just a war for truth. It's a war for attention, a war for focus, a war for your ability to pause, to reflect, to choose. And in that pause, in that tiny act of awareness, you reclaim your freedom. That's where it starts. Not with rage, not with noise, but with stillness, with clarity, with the refusal to be automated. In a world training you to forget how to think, remembering how is your greatest rebellion. Stupidity doesn't arrive with a bang. It doesn't storm through the gates of your intellect wearing a warning label. It whispers. It seduces. It wraps itself in certainty and tells you you already know enough. It flatters your comfort. It strokes your ego. And just like that, you stop asking questions. Not because you're incapable, but because it's easier not to. Bonhoeffer saw this surrender not as a failure of intelligence, but as a failure of courage. When he asked, "Who stands fast?" he wasn't asking who knew the most. He was asking who had the strength to keep thinking when the world begged them not to. Because the truth is, thinking hurts. Thought creates tension. It disrupts the easy stories we tell ourselves. And so many of us, educated, self-aware, even spiritually mature, still seek relief from that tension. We mistake intellectual surrender for liberation, when really it's a slow erosion of the soul. To remain human in this age is to accept discomfort, to live with friction, to resist the algorithmic anesthesia that promises peace if you'll only stop thinking for yourself. Bonhoeffer's wisdom still pierces the cost of thought is discomfort, but the price of freedom is everything. If you want sovereignty over your own mind, you must earn it. Daily. Thought is not a gift, it is a practice. Critical thinking must be trained like a muscle stretched and torn and rebuilt. And in a society engineered for speed, for certainty, for agreement, this is the work few are willing to do. But you are not most people. Not anymore. So here is your challenge. Question 1, deeply held belief this week. Not to tear yourself down, but to build something stronger. Ask yourself, not just what you believe, but why. Defend it with your full self, or release it with dignity. Either way, you grow. Either way, you become more conscious, more whole, more you. Bonhoeffer's challenge was never theoretical. It lives on in every moment you resist the pressure to conform, or collapse. Every time you choose curiosity over comfort, truth over tribalism, and sovereignty over sleepwalking, you continue his resistance. In a world built to numb the mind, choosing to think is the highest form of rebellion. And that rebellion, quiet as it may seem, is how civilizations are saved not all at once, but one mind at a time. Let yours be one of them. If this kind of thought-provoking, psychologically rich content resonates with you, make sure to subscribe and share it. Helps more minds wake up in a world that desperately needs them.